But I was told about Cam and Ewan, okay, and that they run this strong podcast dealing with PR and legal issues, okay, and those are two of the things that are very important to me because I have a lot of legal issues and I'm tremendous at public relations, okay?
Recorded live from Hong Kong and Toronto. This is the PR and Law Podcast.
The PR and Law Podcast.
Turn it up. With your hosts, Cam McMurchie and Ewan Christie.
That was quite the introduction for a very busy news week. Welcome to episode number 8 of the PR and Law Podcast. I'm your co-host, Cam McMurchie, alongside Ewan Christie.
Hello, Cam.
I'm a PR guy based in Hong Kong and publisher of the Digital Bits PR and Communications newsletter at digitalbitspr.com. And Ewan is an employment lawyer and partner at Duntroon LLP in Toronto, Canada, and online at duntroonllp.law. So if you enjoy the podcast, please tell a friend. You can follow us on social media as well. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And our account is PR Law Podcast. So PRLAW Podcast. You can find us on those 4 social networks. And we're also on YouTube if you prefer to listen/watch that way. And we'd also pretty appreciate it if you could support us on Patreon. That means a lot. We put a lot of time and effort into this show. And you can find that information on our website, prlawpodcast.com, and you can click support the show. And we can take your questions as well. We're starting to get some questions coming in. It's exciting. We want to have a section of the show where we can tackle some of your questions. Just tag us on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. So, Ewan, this week was insane. It feels like the world is burning. What's happening on your side?
Well, first of all, Cam, I got to say, I know you come from a journalism background. You're a reporter, but that was quite the scoop in the opening there. I don't know how you got the big man to give us a shout out, but hey, I'm happy you did. That's great. It's nice to know that he's listening and he thinks we're doing a good job.
You would think that he's a little bit too busy to listen to podcasts, but hey, if he can find time for Fox and Friends, he can find time for us.
Well, hey, that's a great point. Yeah, he's had a very, very busy week. I can't remember the last time I've seen so much stuff going on in the news, and I'm sure you're sort of chomping at the bit to jump into some of that stuff, particularly in terms of what's going on in China and what's going on in Hong Kong. I mean, here in the Great White North, we've had a relatively quiet week, I guess, by comparison to what's going on with our friends to the south and what's going on in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, that's right. There's the George Floyd case, which has really been astounding in the U.S. So there was the announcement of sanctions against China last week, and then of course COVID-19. So COVID-19 is not going to be as prominent this week, but we do want to just give a quick update. All right. So as mentioned, we're up to over 6 million cases worldwide. 370,000 people are dead. In the U.S., 1.8 million cases overall, and over 100,000 people dead now. And in Hong Kong, we had the same sort of situation last week, which is most days we have no new cases. And then on one day, when a flight comes in from somewhere, usually Pakistan, there's a couple of cases on board. We had that last week. We had 3 new cases. I think it was on Friday. And so, that bumped us up slightly. But the one thing I want to draw attention to this week, and I'm going to put this in the show notes because it's kind of a recommended read, is Vietnam. And you and I have been to Vietnam several times. I love the country. I love spending time there. It's one of my favorite places literally in the world to go. But too. CNN had a nice feature on them and the fact that they've had 0 deaths from COVID-19. They've had 328 cases in total, which is very low, considering, CNN referred to Vietnam as a low middle income country. So it's not third world or anything like that. It's developing, and it's developing quickly, and their economy has been very strong. But the fact there's not 1 death, and of course, naturally, there's going to be some skepticism about that, about those numbers. But they actually go into hospitals and talk to people and look around, and the doctors say, look, there's They're not coming in. This is truthful. And so CNN looked at, how they were able to do that, because it's quite remarkable. And if there's one thing out of this whole crisis that has really been noteworthy, it's the countries that have been able to really respond well, to COVID-19, to act fast, to institute policies quickly to protect people, and those that were not able to do that. And I think we know who leads that list.
Wow, that's crazy. Did you say just over 300 cases in Vietnam? That's it?
328 cases. Yes. And they, they closed their border.
Astounding.
Early. Yeah, they closed their border very early. They set up camps for any suspected cases. CNN breaks down all of the steps they took and how quickly they took them, and I think it speaks really highly just of the administration or the administrative organization of that country, which is, it's surprising to me, especially that it's so close. It borders China, quite literally.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think, Vietnam has a population of almost 100 million people, right? So, I mean, we're not talking, I mean, that's really, really astounding.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, as soon as there's no more quarantines on these in and out of Hong Kong, that's the first place I'm heading is Vietnam. And I actually feel now good about going there. The fact they've been able to control this so well.
Well, yeah. Hey, hopefully I can join you. You could use the vacation. I mean, I wanted to talk briefly about, again, these unemployment numbers in the United States, which, there's been another 2.1 million Americans that filed for unemployment benefits last week. They're now looking at a total of just under 41 million Americans who've applied for unemployment benefits since mid-March. And that translates to an unemployment rate across the country of almost 24%, which is, I mean, that's crazy. Those are really, really crazy numbers. Of course, the death count in the U.S. is over 100,000 as well. When are these numbers going to start to come down? I mean, I know they're coming down, but still every week the number of unemployment benefits that are being or files that are being processed in the US, it continues to really be a shocking number.
Yeah, the numbers aren't coming down. I mean, the growth is slowing. I mean, there's fewer people now going filing for unemployment each week, but the numbers are still climbing. And yeah, it is worrying. I mean, we've touched on it before. I don't believe that all of those jobs are coming back. In fact, many of those jobs might not be coming back. And I think that's the real scary part. And I mean, this kind of leads into the George Floyd case. I mean, we talked about just the possibility of social unrest. I mean, the United States has a massive wealth gap, as everybody knows. And, more and more of those funds are heading to the top 1% and 2% of income earners. And especially when you see this many people unemployed. And then you've got, very emotionally charged issues in the U.S. It's a cauldron of unrest that really, I think, is playing out right now in the George Floyd case.
Yeah, well, I mean, I saw that police have arrested nearly 1,400 people in 17 U.S. cities. There were at least governors in at least 9 states activating, the National Guard to respond to protests. And there were curfews. I mean, the number of curfews imposed. I mean, I think the numbers I saw as of last night was something like 16 or 17 U.S. states or cities, major cities had imposed curfews to try and keep people at home, to stop some of the violence, some of the looting, some of the just the crazy civil unrest that we've seen over the last few days.
Yeah, these are the biggest national riots in decades, really. I mean, it's shocking, some of the footage that I've seen. I mean, I'm obviously much farther away from the US than I used to be when I was living in Canada, but I mean, obviously that's making big news here and in China. But some of the videos on Twitter, I mean, because social media is so prominent now. We've been saying that for years, but there hasn't really been a situation like this in the US on social media yet. And, the footage of swarms of people, I mean, there was a case in Chicago where they had badly outnumbered the police officers and began attacking the police and were successful in doing so. I mean, cases where police officers were being dragged along the ground and beaten and kicked. I mean, these are things that I could not imagine ever happening. But I think the anger is so great. And I think I do believe that most of this does, surround the death of George Floyd and just the inequality in that and the racism in that. I do think there's probably a few people with other concerns out there as well, sort of taking advantage of the situation. But I don't think that group is very big. I mean, I think the outrage over that killing is justified, and I think we're seeing the result of years of that sort of thing happening without much recourse.
Yeah, and I think what's really unique about these protests is that, if you look at the race riots that occurred related to Rodney King in the early '90s, it was fairly localized, right? I mean, it was occurring predominantly in LA. Whereas this, I mean, I saw some of the footage. There were people protesting and looting in Portland. So, I mean, just how widespread it's become across the country is, at least as far as I can recall, incredibly unique from any of the large scale protests we've seen in the past.
And it's the first time where, there is a president that is stoking the flames of this issue. I think people are probably familiar with his tweet. The quote was, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." And I know people sometimes downplay that and just say it's just words, but actually it's quite powerful, because it gives law enforcement, police officers, and sometimes other people as well, sort of cover to take more stronger, sometimes lethal action against the protesters. And we've seen that here in Hong Kong too, when the Communist Party came out in strong support of the Hong Kong police. Their behavior did change. It became much worse because they knew they were given that thumbs up.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk about near the end of the show, but I guess seeing as we're there now, I guess I'll bring it up, is the speech that Killer Mike gave. Killer Mike, who's one half of the hip hop group Run the Jewels. He spoke at the Atlanta Mayor's Conference, and I would encourage anybody and everybody to go online and listen to his full speech. It's about 8 minutes long. It's really quite remarkable. I mean, he's clearly very emotional. He starts the speech talking about how he doesn't even want to be there talking. He was sort of encouraged by a close friend to speak out. He's obviously very, very critical of the police presence and how the police treat blacks in America. But then at the same time, he talks about how his father is an Atlanta police officer. He has a couple cousins who are police officers. And his message was for people to go home. And he repeats this phrase, and really I'm going to paraphrase it. You should check it out. But talking about going home and strategize, mobilize. It's really quite a compelling talk. And it's in these times you want to be able to look to your political leaders to sort of step up to the plate and really speak to what's going on in the nation, and speak to the temperament and the climate of the nation. I haven't really seen any political leaders do that, but listening to Mike speak, it certainly really touched me emotionally. Clearly touched him, and I know, at least based on what I've read online, it's touched a lot of Americans as well.
Yeah, because I lived through the unrest in Hong Kong last year, which also, it didn't involve looting that way. I mean, there were some stores that were destroyed if they were connected to mainland China somehow, but there were lots of fires and lots of destruction and lots of, very violent scenes. And I think it's the first time that I understood the desperation of people. When I was younger, I was a little more conservative, and I'm still a bit conservative, more on the conservative side. But like, I did look at people who were protesting as, come on, like, there's other ways to go about this. This isn't, causing destruction or blocking roads or, a hunger strike. There's more productive ways to do this. But, as I get older, I realize sometimes there aren't. Sometimes there aren't other ways to do it. Sometimes those avenues have all been cut off. And the only option is to either do something drastic or do nothing. And I think people, if they feel strongly about something, doing nothing, they can't live with themselves for that. And because, I felt this last year too. I feel strongly about, Hong Kong's relationship with China, and it's home for me. I have an emotional attachment here. I like the people here. I could go on about that. But when you see somebody sort of putting their foot down on them or their knee on their neck, is one way to look at it. It is desperate, and I found myself saying, okay, maybe it is time to up the ante a bit. Maybe it is time to do something more drastic and more dangerous, because nothing else is getting their attention. And I'm not fully supportive of everything that's happening in the US, obviously, but I understand it, I feel like, in a way that I didn't understand it before.
I mean, that video was truly, truly disturbing. I don't really know what else to say. And I mean, if I was an African American subjected to what a lot of African Americans are subjected to each and every day, just for walking down the street, minding their own business, I you know, yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, the video speaks for itself.
Yes, and I understand we're going to get to something similar to that, actually, in when we talk about some stuff that you wanted to talk about. Before we get to that, actually, we have a packed show today. We're going to come back to the George Floyd killing, because there is a real PR marketing angle to it that is, it's a big subject for people in the marketing and communication space. So I do want to get to that a little bit later. But first, I mean, the other big news this week was yes, President Trump did speak about Hong Kong. That night, it was Friday night / Saturday morning. It was 2 a.m. actually, Saturday morning, Hong Kong time, when he spoke. And I had to stay up because obviously I work at an international Chinese company, which needed to provide updates to our senior executives very quickly. So, I stayed up for that and listened to it. I actually thought the speech was very well done. I thought President Trump, he did not meander off script. The speech was well written, and he delivered it very well. I was really surprised by that. I mean, because I've listened to so many of President Trump's speeches over the years. I think sometimes him going off script kind of provides some of the humorous moments of it. But he was very disciplined on this one, and I'm not sure what it was about this that made him that way. But I mean, it's very strong, the actions the United States are taking in terms of removing the special status that Hong Kong has, and treating it basically just as part of mainland China now. I mean, the only thing.
Cam, sorry to interrupt. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think for most people probably who are at least aren't familiar with the region, what's going on specifically, probably they're not necessarily familiar with the full repercussions of that decision by the United States to sort of revoke that special status. Can you speak to that at least a little bit?
Sure. I mean, just for people's background, I mean, Hong Kong, there is an international boundary between Hong Kong and the rest of China. So, I mean, we do operate separately here. We do have an elected legislature. We have the Hong Kong dollar, not the Chinese renminbi, so on and so forth. So, I mean, it really is like two countries. And if a Chinese person wants to visit Hong Kong, they have to get a permit and then cross the border and get that stamped and come into Hong Kong. So it has been very separate traditionally, and that's why the U.S. has treated Hong Kong differently, because it is a free society. It's an open and free society. We have a free press. Our internet's not censored. We don't. Our government's generally responsive to people here. But the change, basically, to remove that special status means that for instance, the trade war. So there are tariffs on products coming out of mainland China. Those tariffs did not apply to Hong Kong because we're considered separate. They will now that's changed, because a lot of Chinese companies did route things from China to Hong Kong to the U.S. as a way to avoid those tariffs. So that window will be gone. There's talk about the Hong Kong dollar pegged to the US dollar. I mean, the US has to support that. It's very complicated to explain. But if the US decides that it's not going to support that peg or allow that peg, the Hong Kong dollar could plummet in value very quickly, because we don't have the reserves here to defend that peg appropriately. And then there's questions just over customs and tariffs, and basically, as a free port, things move in and out of Hong Kong without any tariffs for the most part, and that will change now as well for at least trade with the U.S. And then the last one really is visas. So there's some concern that it might be more difficult to get visas to visit the United States. I mean, right now, Hong Kong people already need to apply for visas to the U.S. And they don't need one to go to Canada, though. So that's quite interesting. I'm not sure why there has been one to the U.S. considering. So those are the main ones. The last one that I think is the only one that really makes a difference is to put restrictions on travel for any mainland or Hong Kong government officials or anyone who has played a part in eroding Hong Kong's autonomy. So that would basically mean a travel ban from the United States for a lot of those people. I'm not sure if they're too upset with that, but that's another one. But I mean, all of this does have to be introduced and passed, is my understanding. So it's still up in the air. Like, when will this happen? How drastic is it going to be? Because there haven't been too many details. And knowing President Trump, I think the feeling over here is he might have spoken with a bunch of fire and brimstone, but it's not clear yet if he will actually take strong action on it. So it is still up in the air. And the last thing, the part that really made me sad, is these changes hurt Hong Kong. They don't hurt China. So, I mean, the president said a lot of kind things about Hong Kong in his speech. But China's fine if Hong Kong is degraded in the world. I mean, I think they're absolutely fine with that. And it's unfortunate that it's people here that are going to pay the price. And so on that part, I've had difficulty with, even since the first Hong Kong Democratic, I can't remember the name of the act now, but ever since that was introduced last year, I had that feeling that this is picking on the wrong guy. But that's where we are.
It's really, I mean, it's sad, right? More than anything, it's sort of sad. And, I think there's been a lot of hyperbole, and I'm sure, you can speak to that certainly better than I can online, in terms of, this is the end of Hong Kong. This is the end of Hong Kong. But I think there has to be some moderation in there somewhere, that this doesn't necessarily spell, the certain defeat of Hong Kong. I mean, we've certainly seen that the city is prepared to mobilize and organize, to get out there to protest and demonstrate to the world what's going on. But I mean, what are your thoughts on some of the media around that, Cam?
I've been hearing it's the end of Hong Kong since I first started hearing about Hong Kong. I mean, this is not new. I mean, since, if you go back to the 80s, they signed, Britain and China signed the agreement that would hand Hong Kong back, I think in 1982 or 83 or 84, somewhere around there. But in the years before that, there was rumors of it. So, I mean, going back that far, I mean, there were concerns about the end of Hong Kong. Then 97 was said at a handover. There was a mass exodus of Hong Kongers and money prior to 97. And then after 97, there was the Asia financial crisis. And it just continued. Even in 2003, there was a big protest here about, the security law, which was introduced at that time, which was not passed because of the protests. And so I feel like there has always been this fear that Hong Kong is ending. And as a result of that, I feel like people are continually looking for evidence of that. So when something happens right away, it's here's more proof that the end is near for Hong Kong, and it keeps on going. Hong Kong will be here, obviously, for a very long time. It's just a matter of what kind of form will the city take. And I do believe that China does want Hong Kong to be successful. Like, I definitely believe that. I don't think China does want to destroy the city. I think they would rather destroy the city than have it be autonomous. But I think they would rather have it sort of on a financial side be open, very open. So, the dispute resolution that's done here internationally, the company rules here, the ease of setting up a business or setting up a headquarters, doing business here, all of that stuff, the tax regime, all of that will stay in place. And I think, and along with the British common law legal system, I think China does support all this and sees the value of this. They just don't want this constant undermining of their own authority and attention, because it does lose face. And it's interesting. I was talking to a mainland person the other day, because there was a word that came out of Beijing that tried to soothe Hong Kongers' fears, that basically said, look, we don't mind if you protest. We don't mind if you go to the June 4th vigil. We don't mind if you criticize the Communist Party. But you can't do things like throw the flag into the sea or spray paint over national emblems. And it's interesting when I heard that, because I thought, yeah, it's kind of about face. Those things are very symbolic. It's interesting because they're minor things, really, but yet so symbolic. And those two incidents of the flag in the harbor and the spray painted emblems, that was shared widely in China, and that really angered people much more than the protests or the violence. And I think that's what this subversion law is trying to stop. But we don't know. We don't know until it's introduced. We don't even know what the text of the law is yet. But we do know that it's going to still go through the Hong Kong legal system. So it will be, if someone is charged under these laws, it will be an open trial, and we'll be able to see what happens.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we also know Hong Kong geographically isn't just going to pick up and move, and for that reason, I can't see how this changes the fact that it will, it's a strategic travel hub, it's a strategic shipping hub, it's a strategic financial hub, all as a basis of its geographic location. That's not going to change regardless of what's going on politically, and I think that's something that people need to keep in mind as well.
And I think the overall approach to governance here won't change. I mean, it's a highly efficient government here, and you've been here. I mean, the transportation systems are efficient. It's the one big city I know of in the world where you can be sitting downtown an hour before your flight takes off and still get to the plane in time. I mean, these sorts of things are going to continue, and I think they'll still be attractive. But I do think that companies are going to take a look at how this is enforced. How eager will the government be to charge people under this law? Because, I mean, depending on how it's written, I mean, it could be if you say something against the party on Twitter or on Facebook. I mean, is that enough to charge you with, subversion or sedition or something? Where is that?
Well, exactly, right. I mean, that's always the issue when you're introducing any sort of bill, legislation, law, with broad language like that. It's, well, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, I understand what these words mean in the English language, but what are the real implications from a legal perspective? How are the courts going to enforce it? What is the influence of the mainland going to be on the Hong Kong judiciary in terms of how these sorts of precedents are established in the country? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens.
The one area that I'm confident that China has not interfered in is the legal system. I mean, it is according to British common law, and you talk to the chief justices here, like they will say that like no one gives them a call to talk to them. And I think when you look at the verdicts that are coming out of Hong Kong, that has to be the case, because there's people that China really dislikes, who judges have ruled in favor of. So I mean, and to me, that's really the only thing now that sets Hong Kong apart from the mainland. But I think it's a really key difference. And if that continues that way, I have a little more faith, sort of in the future. It's the legal system really is the last leg that's maintaining the way of life here and the ease of doing business and the comfort of people from all over the world coming here and knowing that they do have rights and they do have protections, and China can't just pick them up off the street and put them in jail and have them disappear, which is happens all the time up in the mainland. But there was one other thing. I thought, the story of Hong Kong there's always so many contradictions. There was a tweet the other day that I saw from somebody who said something along the lines of, he's already heard from one financial company that's leaving Hong Kong before the end of 2020, and they're relocating their APAC hub to Singapore. And so and he fashioned this as, there's going to be more of this coming. And a guy underneath replied to this tweet and just posted a link. And the link was to an article that said Uber is moving its Asia Pacific headquarters from Singapore to Hong Kong. And they just announced that. And I thought, this is exactly how things tend to go. There's always going to be a bit of good news and a bit of bad news. And even in light of all of what's going on right now, there's a major US company that's planning to come here for their headquarters. So it's so hard to say what the future will be or how people will react until it plays out, because in the media and on Twitter and on social media, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of expectation, there's a lot of emotion. But when that dies down, what are companies actually going to do? What are people actually going to do? They have to look at things, in a very sober way and decide what their next steps are. And like you mentioned, there's still a lot of very positive features of Hong Kong for international businesses.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. And yeah, this seems somewhat reminiscent to me of what happened in the '95 referendum in Quebec, where the province came very, very, very close to separating from the rest of the country. And there were huge financial implications that followed that. Much of the financial centers and companies that were set up in Montreal in particular, they picked up and moved to Toronto, and everybody thought, oh, it's the end of Quebec, it's the end of Montreal, as sort of a huge urban center within the country. And it was, I mean, for a few years, and then things kind of slowly but surely went back to normal, and businesses returned, and the economy rebounded, and it became once again a vibrant center. I mean, it's different than what it was. It will never again be sort of that huge financial hub that it was, as compared with Toronto at the time. But it did find its legs again, and I think it's Hong Kong's sort of an interesting comparator with what happened in Quebec.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things still need to be determined before we figure out exactly how this is going to work out.
Continue the debate with us on social media. Join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PR Law Podcast. All one word, PRLAW Podcast. Send us your questions now by email to askus@prlawpodcast.com. That's all one word, askus@prlawpodcast.com. Or on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. That's hashtag PRLAWPOD.
All right, you dog, what have you got going on?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the Amy Cooper case. I know probably a lot of our listeners have heard about this or seen the video that was circulated quite widely on social media and different websites.
This is new for me.
Sorry?
Yeah, you'll have to. This is new for me. I had not actually heard this. So walk us through.
Oh, okay.
Walk us through it.
So, well, good. Then I can put you on the spot. Like you put me on the spot a few times in the past. That's great. So Amy Cooper was a woman. She lives in New York. She was walking her dog in Central Park, specifically the Ramble, which, as I understand, is a location that bird watchers like to frequent. On this particular occasion, she was walking her dog without a leash, and in the Ramble, one of the laws of the park is that all dogs must be leashed in the Ramble. There was a man by the name of Christian Cooper, no relation to Amy Cooper, who was doing just that. He was in the Ramble, he was watching birds, and when he saw Amy Cooper's dog wandering around and effectively digging up the ground and compromising some of the natural habitat of the birds, he called out and he asked her to put her dog back on its leash. And what followed, Cam, I could describe it to you, but really the best way to do it is to just play the clip of a video that Christian Cooper himself filmed of the altercation.
Right. And I just want to say to listeners, you're going to hear the background kind of change suddenly. And it's because I was boosting the audio, because at times in this video, she's far away from the camera and she's difficult to hear. So you'll hear it clipped, but I haven't removed any audio from this. It's all complete, but you'll hear that sort of jarring back and forth. Here's the audio.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, who has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the Ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
All right. So there you have it. Now, as Amy Cooper makes abundantly clear through that video, Christian Cooper is African American. And what what the audio doesn't make clear is that through the entirety of that video, Christian Cooper kept distance from Amy Cooper. At no point did he invade her personal space. On the contrary, when she attempted to invade his personal space, he effectively asked her to stay back, to keep away. And her response was to make, in a very threatening tone, threat to call the police, to suggest that he was somehow doing something wrong. But what's clear from the video and from the audio is the insinuation that she is going to rely on the fact that Christian is an African American as a threat. She clearly, her language is guised in this very racialized tone of, I know the police are going to respond if I demonstrate that you're an African American man, that's going to further compromise your position in all of this. And when she doesn't get the response that she wants from whoever it is that she's speaking with on the other end of the phone, you can hear her voice become sort of frantic near the end, as if to suggest that there's some imminent threat. And of course, as the video clearly demonstrates, through the entirety of this altercation, again, Christian Cooper is well back from Amy Cooper. He does not invade her physical space in any way, shape, or form. All he wanted was for her to put her dog back on its leash. And as you can hear, he says, thank you at the very, very end. That's Amy Cooper putting her dog on its leash. And then he turns off the video and walks away. Anyway, what happened after that, Cam, is what's really, really fascinating in all this. So Christian Cooper shared the video with his sister, Melody. Melody then posted the video on Twitter. And from there, of course, the internet got a hold of it and did what the internet often does, and started doing some background research on Amy Cooper. And they found out where she worked. Turns out she was, and we'll get to the past tense explanation for that in a moment, a portfolio manager at Franklin Templeton Investments. And, you know, as I've learned, that's a multi-billion-dollar asset management firm. The company later that evening issued a statement explaining that, you know, it takes these matters very seriously. It was in the process of investigating, and that Amy Cooper had been put on a, quote, administrative leave. Well, again, that really didn't satisfy the internet, and a number of people effectively started commenting and making some really, really valid criticism to the effect of, this woman's a portfolio manager. Can you imagine if you were an African-American man or woman that had to work under her management? How would you feel seeing this video? A number of people that work or have some affiliation with Franklin Templeton effectively went to the internet and said, I will no longer have any involvement or dealings with your company, with your company's funds, until this person is removed. Sure enough, the very next day, the company issued a statement on Twitter that, and I'll read it, it's very short. Following our internal review of the incident in Central Park yesterday, we have made the decision to terminate the employee involved, effective immediately. We do not tolerate racism of any kind at Franklin Templeton, end quote. So yeah, pretty swift response from the company. So Cam, what's your take, to put you on the spot for a moment?
There are so many layers to this story, really. I want to first say, I'm always reluctant on these videos to draw a strong judgment, because we can see everything that happened in the video very clearly. And you can see that she is, I don't want to say hysterical, but she's, it looks like she's overreacting to the scene. And yes, her mention of African-American man a couple of times, it's very clear what she's trying to insinuate. But we don't know how that interaction started. We do have to depend on what both sides say. And so that concerns me a little bit. Not that I think that there's something sinister about it, just that so many times there's little nuances that are not picked up in the actual video. And then I think it looks like when the video ends, he is walking away. I think it's probably fairly complete. That's the first one. But I think, I mean, so she was doxxed, basically, which is something that's happening a whole lot more with people online. And I think it's It's dangerous. I think people have to be careful of what they're doing out there because, yes, you can be a stranger in a video and people can find who you are. Again, that's happened here in Hong Kong with particular police officers that are caught in videos. It's not long before they find out where his family lives and where his kids go to school, and they're harassed. So I think people have to think about this a whole lot more. And then the Franklin Templeton firing her, I mean, to me, that seems like it's something justified because people said they were going to pull their assets from Franklin Templeton. So in that case, there's a direct business implication of her behavior, which seems to give them a little bit more cover in taking action. But my question to you is, if she was working at a gas station or somewhere maybe not as well known or not as big, would the employer have the right to remove her or dismiss her if there was no business implication to her behavior?
Yeah, well, the answer to that question, like so many things in the legal world, is going to depend on where you are, the jurisdiction, and the sort of applicable employment law rules. I can tell you in Ontario, yeah, I mean, absolutely. In Ontario and in most provinces across the country, and again, an employer can terminate an employee for no reason whatsoever, provided that termination isn't a violation of a provision of the Human Rights Code. So really, more specifically, as long as it's not discriminatory in some way, shape, or form, they can terminate that employee as long as they give them reasonable notice of the termination of their employment. So, regardless of who your employer is, if they looked at this and thought, I just don't want that kind of person working at my company, be it a gas station, be it an asset management company, sure, they can absolutely let them go, pay them their severance, and say that's it. The more interesting question is, can they terminate them for just cause? And again, just cause would result in the employee receiving nothing in terms of termination pay and severance. And that's sort of a more complicated question. So, I mean, if the employer had an employee code of conduct, for example, that spoke to racial issues of racial discrimination, and that employee had signed it, and if the employer stipulated in that code of conduct that violating any of the provisions of the code could result in just cause for termination, then yeah, perhaps. Also, did her behavior actually damage the image of the employer? I mean, I think in this case, yeah, it certainly did. And as a portfolio manager, she's certainly senior enough to make the argument that this could have implications for our company's bottom line. And, also, Cam, I mean, if she's a portfolio manager, she's going to be interacting with a number of employees or customers, many of whom might be uncomfortable dealing with a woman who has acted out in a racist manner. And again, that could also theoretically be just cause for the termination of her employment. I mean, so those are sort of a few of the points from a for cause thing. What I found sort of interesting about this story was some of the media response afterwards. I read a lot of stories that spoke to the racial undertones, quote unquote, in the clip. And I thought that was a really interesting and somewhat bizarre choice of words, because I don't really see any racial undertones at all. I think this is about as obvious as racism gets. There's nothing subversive about it. She straight up at the beginning of the video says, "I'm going to tell them that an African-American man is threatening me." It doesn't get any clearer than that. And then when her voice, again, it sort of jumps, as you can hear at the end of the video, and becomes increasingly frantic. That clearly was indicative of this woman demonstrating, trying to use, Christian Cooper's race as a card to play against him and trying to up the ante of the threat level. And that is just so fundamentally wrong that as an employer, I would have a hard time understanding or believing that the employer could come to any other conclusion other than we have to terminate this employee.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on one thing you just said there about the racial undertones. I think I agree with you on the point that, when you look at that video, and the first time I looked at it, right away, it stuck out to me that she said, "I'm going to tell them that you're an African American man," and like right away you think, "Oh, I see what she's doing." It's clear as day, that signal. But at the same time, she didn't use any racial epithets. She didn't say something that was overtly racist. We understand her racism through a signal that she sent. And that's why I think racial undertones is there. If she would have come out and started calling him the N-word or something horrible, you'd say that's a racist attack, period. In this way, it's a racist attack because of sort of her phrasing, and we can infer what she's doing, right? But we don't know 100% that if there was an Asian man there, she would have said an Asian man, or if there was a Latino man there, she would have said Latino. We don't know for sure. I think we can guess. I think we know pretty much that she's racist. But again, I'm just thinking from the legitimate, like if you're going to write it down, can you say that she's a racist for saying the man is an African American man? It's hard to pin that down still, even though we all recognize it, if that makes any sense.
Well, it does. And I think, what's important is that contextually I think we have to take the position that yes, this is a clear act of racism on the part of Amy Cooper. I think that's important because rarely in life do circumstances present themselves that are so blatantly and obvious. Someone using an N-word contextually, it's always the context. And this is like any, virtually any argument you look at within a legal lens. You always have to look at context. You always have to look at the unique situation and the unique circumstances. But when you look at this, sorry, go ahead.
If that was a white man who asked her to put her dog on her leash, do you know for sure that she wouldn't be confrontational?
No, of course I don't. I'm no idea. No idea.
This is kind of what I'm getting at is we like, again, the conclusion that we draw. I agree. She's racist, and she was insinuating that because of his race that she was in greater danger and needed more help. So we can see that. But again, I feel like if it were in court, and you're the lawyer, not me, it would still be like this is a clear cut case of racism. I mean, her defense would be, I was describing the guy there, and if he was a different color, or if he were Asian, or if he was Latino, I would have said that as a descriptor. Like, and we don't, even though we can feel her meaning, we can't say for sure that that's not true. Do you know what I mean? If we have to rely on facts.
Yeah, look, I see your point, and I think that would certainly be the logical argument from the other side. I mean, in an employment context, however, again, the employer has the discretion to take the position that, look, sorry, regardless of the explanation, we don't tolerate that sort of conduct within our company, and we take the position that this was an act of racism, and we're going to terminate you, and we'll pay you your reasonable notice. We'll give you your severance, what have you, but we're going to let you go. And again, I mean, an employer can do that, in most provinces in the country, at any time for any reason or no reason whatsoever, provided they give them that termination pay or that severance. Of course, if they want to allege that there's just cause for discharge and not pay that employee anything, then that's a much more complicated case. But I think, this is also a great opportunity. And this was something I wanted to get your take on, Cam, for Franklin Templeton, because really in many ways, this is good advertising. I think it could be spun as good advertising for the company that, one of its employees acted out in a completely inappropriate manner, and the company acted rather quickly. Now, of course, they initially said, she was put on, an administrative leave. But I mean, really, the following day, they terminated the employee and issued a statement, condemning the behavior. And of course, I mean, I wasn't familiar with Franklin Templeton before this incident. Is it possible, Cam, for the company to sort of spin this in a positive way?
Yeah, so Franklin Templeton is very big. They have offices here too. They're a very large firm. So I'm familiar with them. But they, I think they really had no choice. I think in a situation like this, it's not something, because what they do, if they do not fire her, then they're putting their entire brand behind her and supporting her. And it makes them a target just as much as she's a target. I don't think that, I mean, they would much rather not be put in that situation, even though there might be some sort of positive outcome out of this because they were able to take a stand. It's still a situation that no company wants to find themselves in. And I mean, this happens periodically, where companies are sort of held accountable for the behavior of their employees. And I think in this case, again, watching the video the first time I watched it without any context, I picked up the African American comment and the way she said it, and you can feel, what she's trying to imply. And because that feeling is picked up by, I'm sure, most people that watch it, they had no choice really but to let her go. And I think I don't think they should fire her or dismiss her, again, right away as soon as they find out. I do think they owe her a little bit of due diligence in terms of, getting the facts of the case and finding out what happened. But they don't have a week to do that. I do think they have to do it fairly quickly, which it looks like they did. And I'm making these comments without looking into their response at all. I haven't seen their statement or anything like that. But I think if they waited a day, I'm sure that they probably talked to her to find out what happened. And then they probably had, their own legal counsel saying this is what you should do, and they put out a statement. And I think that's sort of textbook handling from a PR perspective. Although, again, I haven't read their actual statement.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the statement is brief, and frankly, I think it was a good statement. And I don't know, and perhaps you'll disagree with me, but again, I don't know that it needed to be any longer than what it was. I mean, literally, the quote is, "Following our internal review of the incident in Central Park yesterday, we have made the decision to terminate the employee involved effective immediately. Period. We do not tolerate racism of any kind at Franklin Templeton. Period. End of statement."
Yes, that is exactly the right way to do it. I think because it's a lot of CEOs or senior executives like to take these situations and add a bunch of sort of self-congratulatory wording in terms of, this is not who we are, and we have these beliefs and they don't align, and we've taken over a long period of time, we've been active in anti-racist activities by, promoting awareness and blah, blah, blah. Like sometimes there is a real push to kind of include that sort of stuff in there. And I think when you do that, it kind of looks too self-serving. And I think in a case like this, the best thing they can do is exactly what they did. That would have been, I mean, it's easy to say in hindsight, but that really would have been my advice. Don't get into it. It's just, everyone saw what she did. Everybody knows, there's no need for an explanation. Just say she doesn't, adhere to the values that we share here, and she's gone. Period. And I think that's a great way to manage it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the video speaks for itself. It's not as though they needed to provide any additional context. They
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What if, let's say, that morning or the day before, she was informed that her father had passed away, or some horrific news that maybe made her, or that she could potentially say, changed her personality or her response into something that it wouldn't normally be. Is there any kind of line of defense that way that the company would have to consider?
What, mitigating factors for racism? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, look, employees make these sorts of arguments all the time. They'll say, "Hey, look, I wasn't myself. I've been going through a difficult time." Perhaps if it's someone who suffers from some mental illness and, they take medication for something like that, then yeah, I mean, an employer in those very specific circumstances has, a duty to accommodate an employee up to undue hardship. So they would have to take into consideration, a particular mental illness, because that is something that would be protected under the Human Rights Code, at least in the province of Ontario, and again, in most provinces in the country. But this is something different. This isn't like, a woman who acted out and, was swearing profusely at somebody, or, had just kind of lost their temper in an isolated moment. The context of the comment was clearly racial. And I think that's where, any mitigating factors you might want to throw at it, be it, the examples you gave of a parent dying or something else, really just wouldn't come into play. And nobody's going to accept that. A court's not going to accept that in most circumstances, and most employers aren't going to accept that either. And for good reason.
Right. Last point on this, I think I do hear people telling me sometimes family members saying that racism is not a big deal. It's beaten. People are not racist anymore. And I think this is such a good example of how people are racist, because I've said to other people, it's not a matter of, calling people names or bullying them or doing really overt actions or gestures to show racism. It's the more subtle things, and it comes out in moments like this. And I think that's really what we saw here.
Show your support to the PR and Law podcast by making a one-time donation or setting up a subscription with us on Patreon. Every little bit helps us keep the lights on and bring the show to you each week. If you'd like to chip in, please visit prandlawpodcast.com. That's prandlawpodcast.com. Click support the show. Thanks for helping us out.
All right, Ewan, before rudely cutting you off, what was your last point there?
That's okay. Yeah, well, I just wanted, in the interests of context, I completely agree with your point, but and to your point, we're two white guys talking about this. And you're right. This is not something that you and I deal with on a day-to-day basis. I deal with this in my work, from a client's perspective, but again, I can't pretend to walk in the shoes of one of those individuals. And it's very, very, we've got to be very, very careful when talking about this sort of stuff. To your point of friends or family members or whoever saying, we've beaten racism. That's just objectively false. And the experience of one individual is going to be fundamentally different than the experience of another at all times in any circumstance.
This is a very good segue into what I wanted to raise, which is the George Floyd killing. And we've all seen that video as well, or the video of the Minnesota cop with his knee on George Floyd's neck. And the question that a lot of companies are now asking themselves is, should we take a stand on this issue? And this is something that it really does vex companies, all kinds of companies, into whether they should wade into social issues. And generally, the answer has been no. It's too dangerous to go into social issues. It could lose customers. Even if it gains customers on one end, the loss on the other end oftentimes won't be able to balance that off or to cancel that out. And so it's always been something difficult for companies to decide. But in this particular case, some companies have begun to take action. And I want to sort of put this in context and why it's sort of controversial. So Edelman had done a study and found that 2/3 of Americans want brands to make their morals clear. They're actually in favor of it, and they say they would adjust their buying preferences as a result of that. Now, the question has always been, do they mean it? Do people really mean that? If someone enjoys a certain brand, would they stop using or buying or eating whatever that brand just because of the moral stand that they take? And my own feeling is I'm not sure. I actually don't know. I think there's probably evidence sort of on both sides of that. And this is something that isn't just restricted to the US. In China, it's 78% of consumers want their brands to take a stand. 69% in Brazil, 68% in India. These are huge countries by population. So what we've seen in the George Floyd killing so far, naturally, there's one brand that's out in front, and that's Nike. So, Nike had their campaign with Colin Kaepernick, which indeed was very controversial, but at the end, it resulted in literally billions of dollars of revenue for Nike as a result of that. And I think they're hoping for a similar response now. So Nike has released an ad. I would like to play it, except for the fact it's just music with words on the screen. So I'll just read through what it says. And again, it says this was it's just white words on a black screen with music playing, kind of haunting music. sort of meant to strike a bit of an emotional chord. This is what it says. For once, don't do it. Don't pretend there's not a problem in America. Don't turn your back on racism. Don't accept innocent lives being taken from us. Don't make any more excuses. Don't think this doesn't affect you. Don't sit back and be silent. Don't think you can't be part of the change. Let's all be part of the change. How does that make you feel, Ewan, when a company takes a stand? Not just in this case, but this case as well as in general.
Well, I think that Nike example is great, and I think where Nike is probably going to benefit from this and fare well is that there was a precedent, right? They established a precedent with the Kaepernick campaign, and yeah, they got a lot of flack. They got a lot of flack for that. Now, financially, they certainly benefited from it, but they've sort of established with that campaign that, you know what, we're willing to put controversial social issues front and center because, we're a company that takes these issues seriously. So I think with that sort of established precedent, it perhaps gave them a little more leeway to try and tackle this issue. Do I think it's a good thing fundamentally for companies to do? Yeah, I think in certain circumstances, I think where it gets really difficult is it's such a fine line between getting the tone right on these issues, and just getting it so fundamentally wrong. I've had the same thought around general COVID-19 campaigns from companies. We've seen a lot of companies coming out and effectively trying to demonstrate that, hey, we're using this as an opportunity to reflect and take care of our employees and blah, 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 blah. But frankly, a lot of those campaigns for me have just felt like advertorial content. I didn't really feel like it struck the tone such that they were really speaking to what's going on and the state of things. Rather, it was just, hey, don't forget us and remember to buy our stuff. So when you're tackling an issue like this, I think that tone is even more, it's even an even finer line. But I think for the companies that are able to do it well, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, and you make such a good point there. If it is seen as being opportunistic or capitalizing on a negative or controversial situation for your own business gain, I think you risk a very strong public backlash. And that's why this isn't normally advised. And I mean, in my perspective, and I imagine in if you were giving legal advice as well, I mean, you want to minimize risk as much as possible. So when you look at a situation like this, you say, okay, this is the right moral stand to take. So should we take it? And then when you take a look at it, you think, okay, but there are a lot of people that don't agree with this. And do we want to alienate them or not? And I mean, oftentimes the easy answer is just do nothing. Just keep your head down. Don't attract attention, and just focus on growing your business, sort of behind the scenes, and run campaigns that are not divisive or confrontational. And that generally really would be my advice for the most part. But if you do want to go forward with this, there's sort of 4 key things that I think a company would have to consider on this sort of thing. And number 1 is know your audience. Know who your customers are, know what they like, know what they feel, know what they're interested in, know how they respond to things, because that is so important. I mean, a lot of this, if you're going to wade into these hot button issues, you do have to be prepared for some of what the blowback might be. And I think if you know your customers and you know the people that you're dealing with, you'll have a better idea of what kind of blowback that might be. Which is also sort of the second point, which is the company has to do it with its eyes open. I think there would have to be a risk analysis on this. And I know this sounds very dry, but it really is just sort of doing due diligence, taking a look and saying, what is the worst case scenario? If we do this, what could the result be? And can we live with that? Are we okay with that? Does this jeopardize our brand image long-term or not? Does it jeopardize our business long-term or not? And have those discussions as well. And then the third point, which we just touched on, which is don't seem opportunistic. It is that fine line between, sort of siding with a moral or just cause or trying to sell more shoes. And I think Nike has done a good job and I think deserves quite a bit of credit. I mean, the Colin Kaepernick, the Colin Kaepernick campaign was divisive. It got a lot of attention, but at the end of the day, I do think most Americans would side with having to deal with police brutality, especially now. So when you take a look at that, I'm sure Nike did look at that and said, we are comfortable going forward with this. We know it is going to turn off some people, but are those people customers of Nike to begin with? And if they are, how many are there? And maybe there weren't enough to justify a change. And then the fourth point is, ensure whatever you're taking a stand on does align with your brand identity and with your audience. I mean, it would be very strange if Cathay Pacific took a stand on the George Floyd murder. I mean, it's not aligned. You do have to take a look at the people that are most concerned or the people that are most impacted by something, and are they your customers? Are those the people that believe in you and trust you as well? And I think Nike also has done a good job there, because yes, I think the Black community in the United States is a big it's a big profit base for Nike. And I think also just young people in general, and sort of more liberal-minded people with more social values and sort of things like that, tend to be. My guess is they tend to be more Nike customers. And the last thing I just wanted to mention, and Nike wasn't the only company to do something. The other was Reebok, and I thought they came out with just a fabulous line. They did a similar ad to Nike. I'll read it. It's shorter, but it says, "Without the Black community, Reebok would not exist. America would not exist. We are not asking you to buy our shoes. We're asking you to walk in someone else's." And I thought that was an excellent brand message. I thought that was actually more powerful than Nike's. And I think they were able to address the business issue in their statement. We are not asking you to buy our shoes. And I think that also is a good thing to do. I don't think it's easy to work in a line like that, but it does address that one of those concerns that I raised earlier.
Yeah, and I think it's also it's bold. I think we talked about that very, very fine line of getting the tone right, but you also have to keep in mind we're dealing with a pretty sophisticated audience now, in terms of one that's subjected to constant bombardment of advertising in every way, shape, and form online now. And audiences have become pretty well attuned to recognizing when somebody's just trying to sell them something versus trying to convey, a message that is compelling and engaging. And for that reason, I think you do have to be bold in your particular sentiment. You can't say, oh, well, we'd like to go out 100% on a limb here, but, we've got to think about, are we going to get flack? Is there going to be blowback? So let's just do it halfway. You can't do it halfway. And to your point, I think that, and I hadn't heard that Reebok, that slogan or seen the ad. But yeah, I mean, that goes out on a limb. That goes out on a limb. It is bold in its assertion of, this isn't about our shoes. This is about something much bigger than that. And I think that's the kind of messaging that still resonates with people and still demonstrates that, advertising can still play a role and can still be compelling when utilized properly.
For sure. And my advice still would be not to wade into these issues most of the time. And that's only because I think most executives are very risk averse. And that's unfortunate, because I think you look at Nike, you look at Reebok, you look at what they're doing. I admire that a lot. And I admire it because it's not just PR people or marketing people or agencies doing this. It has to have buy-in from the very, very top. And then, people at that executive level, beyond just the CEO, because this is fraught with risk. It's fraught with real business risk. And usually when something is optional, but could bring risk, the option is always just not to do it. Why wade into that when it could have a bad outcome? It's safer just to do nothing. So I think it's important. I think that the corporate world needs a bit more of this, actually, because very big picture, we are living in a time where, things are getting much worse in many ways. And I think if governments are failing, which appears they are in many parts of the world, there is room for corporations to step up in this way, and to be counted on one side or another. All right. Well, Ewan, We're doing pretty well. I mean, we're right on time again. Any recommendations this week? You mentioned something off the top that you wanted to recommend.
Yeah, I mean the speech by Killer Mike. Check it out. We'll put it in the show notes. Just going back to what we were just discussing of really sort of getting the tone right on the issue. He really nails it. It's quite an emotional speech, and again, I wish that there were more politicians in the United States that were prepared to stand up and strike that kind of tone that Killer Mike strikes. Really well worth your time.
Yeah, send me that link, Ewan. I'll put it in the show notes so people can find that. I have not seen it either, so I'm actually looking forward to checking that out. And I do want to mention off the top, we had that wonderful endorsement. We want to thank J.L. Colvin for that. And he's a very well-known Trump impersonator these days. And, I actually have a couple of minutes of audio from him that is absolutely hilarious. And I think we'll drop it in from time to time so you can get little bits of it. But it's great that he's supporting the show, and we really, really appreciate that. Okay, so if you do enjoy this show, please tell a friend. We have been shocked in the last 14 days. The download rates and the subscription rates have shot up in a huge way. So we really, really appreciate that. And we take your support very seriously, and we want to put on a good show each week. So if you do enjoy it, please spread the word. It means a lot. You can also follow us on social media. We're at PR Law Podcast, PR Law Podcast. And we're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you want to listen to us on YouTube, we're over there as well. Anything else you want to add, Ewan, before we wrap this up?
No, just, stay safe. And as Cam pointed out, we love the support. We really, really enjoy doing the show. We want to continue to grow our audience. We want to continue to make the show better. So, if you have any feedback, if you have any issues or topics you'd like us to tackle, let us know. And thanks so much for tuning in.
And I will say too, Ewan's obviously a very busy guy. I mean, we're in different time zones. I'm in Asia, and obviously my job is very busy as well. We literally do not go over this show rundown before we hit the air. We don't have time. So a lot of podcasts, the hosts will actually review it and work on it and discuss it in advance. We're hitting this cold most of the time. So, we apologize if there's any errors, but we're just happy to get a bit of time to record it each week. And that really matters to us. So for you and Christy, this is Cam McMurtry. Thank you so much for listening to the PR Law Podcast. We'll see you next week.
This has been the PR and Law Podcast with Cam McMurtry and Ewan Christie. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. You can also join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by following our account at PR Law Podcast. That's all one word, PRLAW Podcast. Thanks for your support.
Cam and Ewan, strong guys.